Hans Niemann started with d4. Caruana replied knight f6, c4. Caruana played e6, knight out, bishop b4, pinning the knight, queen c2, castles. a3, asking the question to the bishop, bishop takes knight, takes back, d5, bishop g5, pinning the knight, pawn h6, takes. So two pairs of minor pieces have been exchanged. And now takes, queen takes back. Knight c6, queen c3, and rook e8. Rook d1. Pawn e5. So Caruana is willing to develop the bishop to g4. And he is trying to open up the positions. For example, pawn takes back, knight takes back would be good for black. So d5, knight b8, pushing the knight back, pawn e3, and the bishop comes out. Now bishop e2, knight d7. Here, queen takes c7 is risky for Hans because the white king is still in the middle. So rook c8 could be a problem because if the queen takes on b7, we have knight c5 and the knight jumps in. And if the queen just goes back, you have rook c2. b2 pawn is attacked and the king cannot castle because bishop would hang. If queen b7, you also have rook b8, but then you will lose one more pawn. You can take on b2 and the game goes on. So this is very risky for white to take the c7 pawn. So he just castles. And now Caruana defends the c7 pawn. a4, gaining more space. c6. And Hans made a big decision here to push the pawn forward. This pawn is controlling good squares, but it's also a weakness. It's alone. So if Fabi reroutes his pieces and regroups them to attack this pawn would fall. Rook d8. Already he's thinking about attacking the pawn. Pawn a5, bishop g4. h3 takes, pawn takes back. If bishop takes back, Caruana would have played pawn e4, forcing an exchange of queens. So for example, queen takes, knight takes, and the bishop would go back. And then it's easier to attack this pawn. Knight e8 and the pawn would fall. So Hans did not want to go to an endgame. So he plays pawn takes f3. Opening up his king a little bit, but black's pieces are not yet ready to attack. There's only a queen here. So the king doesn't mind. Knight f8, queen b4, attacking b7, rook d7, and knight g6. The knight is heading to h4 to attack f3, and rook d8 is also coming. Rook d1, knight h4, attacking f3, queen g4, defending the square. Rook e6. Rook d8 was another option, but this is more active. The d6 pawn is now attacked. This is a threat, right? Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. Still not a threat because if queen takes, the knight would hang. But once the knight moves, this pawn would fall. Yeah, and now there is too much pressure on the pawn. There is no way to defend it. There are 4 pieces attacking it. And there's only like 2 pieces defending it. So the pawn is gone. A6, takes, bishop takes, and rook takes. Takes. So Caruana is now a clear pawn up. He plays g6, h4, h5, kicking the queen away. And now king g7, just giving some extra space for the king. Pawn e4, queen e7, queen g5, queen b7. So Caruana now reroutes his queen to a good position, to the queen side, where there is a target. And he has an extra pawn over here. So there is no need of the queen on the king side. There's nothing there, but queen is useful on the queen side now. Queen goes back to defend and queen b4. So you see the queen that was over here on the king side is now sitting on b4. That's some very nice moves by Caruana. Queen d2 and exchange. King f6. So it's now a rook and minor piece endgame with an extra pawn for black. Let's see how Caruana converted this. Pawn b4. Pawn g5. Rook moves, attacking the pawn, knight c8. Bishop a6, knight d6. Bishop e2, knight c8. Again defending it. Here Hans could have repeated. I'm not sure what was the logic behind not repeating because he is a pawn down and he went for f4. Discovered attacking the h5 pawn. But of course, you can also take on h4 or f4. So Caruana plays pawn takes h4, bishop takes h5. Now there is a pass pawn on the h file, but that's not a big threat. The king can stop it. So knight d6, rook takes pawn, and pawn takes f4. Pawn f3, defending the pawn. Rook e5, attacking the bishop. Bishop is almost trapped over here. Knight comes in, the knight is heading to the e3 square, which would be a slight fork. You don't want that to happen. So king g2, allowing knight e3, but what would have happened if knight e3? Knight e3, king h3, and if knight takes, the king would take back, and this pawn would fall. So that is why he didn't go immediately knight e3, even rook b5, attacking the pawn, rook a4, and now knight e5, because the knight also keeps an eye on f3. So king h3, king g5, basically forcing knight takes bishop and pawn takes back to happen, not allowing king to take back. Rook comes down, but now you can take the b pawn. Caruana just takes on b4, rook h8, attacking the h4 pawn, but then king f6. If you play rook takes pawn, the rook would be slightly out of play. Black can just start pushing. This pawn is just too close to promotion. The rook will be out of play. Rook check, there is knight g6, or we can even play king e7, getting closer to the side. And rook cannot come to c6, so it's difficult for white. He'll have to come down, and then we can just keep running. So the c pawn is dangerous. So he gives a check. He does not take the h pawn. Rook defends the knight so that the king is free to move. Rook check, king moves. Bishop h5. Still there is no threat. The rook is defended, so there is no pin as well. Knight g6. Defending the h pawn and the f pawn. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Rook is attacked. Rook takes pawn. And now g5. Rook is put inside a cage over here. Now the only way to get out of this is by playing f4. Now f4 is okay, but he could also have played the rook to g2. And that way he could have got out of here. And after rook g2, he can somehow deal with the c pawn, or at least try to deal with the c pawn. The game would have been tougher if that happened. But he played f4, allowing rook check. Now king moves, check, king moves, Caruana repeats, and then he plays pawn takes f4, simplifying the position. After rook takes, king e5. So this is now a winning rook endgame. Even though material is equal, the white king is so far out of the game. Just rook b4 would have attacked this pawn again. But this is where a small nuance comes into play. If Caruana played rook b4, white would give a check, and you cannot take because of the skewer. So Caruana played rook e3. Rook moves, attacking this pawn. Rook c3. Now what is the difference? The difference is if rook goes back, you can play rook c4. And there is no skewer because the king is close to the rook. So that is a very nice, delicate move by Caruana, playing rook e3. Rook moves, rook c3. So instead of b3, the rook is on c3, and then c4 is coming. So he gave up the pawn, so Caruana took it, and now it's a winning extra pawn endgame with the rooks. So king moves up, rook check, king moves, rook check, king moves, and the pawn runs. The inactivity of the white king is the problem here. He's too far away, and the pawn keeps going. Rook moves, rook goes back, rook check, king moves to f6, c3, king moves, rook a7 going to the long side, king moves, and the king is kicked out of there. And the black king keeps going up. Remember, this is the Lucina position. We are about to reach the Lucina position. If the rook is back and the king goes up and the pawn is on c2, then black has a win with the Lucina technique. King b3, rook moves back, pawn push. Rook check, king moves. And rook moves, rook h7. And here Hans resigned, because whatever white does, if white just waits, king will go back. And if you again wait, push. And now if you wait again, then comes the Lucina. Rook check. The king can't go here because the king will hide behind the other king. And when the king goes away, you have rook e5, building a bridge. And now there is no way to do anything because the king will escape. Rook check, king moves, rook check, king moves, rook check, king moves, and rook check, rook blocks. So that is why after rook h7, Caruana almost reached the Lucina position, and Hans decided to throw in the towel because the result is confirmed. So Hans resigned, and Caruana becomes the sole leader of the tournament after 4 rounds by defeating Hans Niemann.